Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. This one's brought to you, and we're going to do it first this time so I don't forget. ERT Radio, so proud sponsor of the program. Go check them out. Go to mixler.com, set up an account there. Follow ERT Radio, that's ERRT Radio, and just you're going to be able to watch, and if you're on Facebook, you'll be able to watch, but listen. You're going to be able to listen to programs like ourselves, Into the Outer Realms with Joey, Dimension with Maureen. Like I said, she's got a couple of shows that's on there, and then Ron also has some music lineups. So definitely thank them. I said ERT Radio. Also want to give a quick plug to this beard company, the Bigfoot Refinery Beard Company. Really nice beard oil. Top-notch customer service. I want to give them a big plug for that too. I screwed up on the mailing address, and not only did they not have a problem with it, they took care of it. They shipped out the order to the correct address and got it all taken care of. They also threw in another little sample, for me to try too, and so I really wanted to thank them for that. So, our guest tonight, Travis Randall, he debut author of book Hounding. It's a epic fantasy. Takes place. He's got developed. So we'll talk to him. See if his thoughts are that if he's trying to take down, Harry Potter. If that's his goal. I mean, I'm sure that's his goal. I mean, who doesn't want to have their own land named after him in Universal Studios? So I'm sure that's the goal. But yeah, so we're going to be talking to him about that book, and we'll also be talking about his passions also with the paranormal. We're going to be talking about the Fermi paradox, the Chinese room. If anybody's ever heard of that, that's another really cool thing. Also, just the state, kind of the way the paranormal is. Just what people's opinions are on how things are. I mean, do we believe it? Do we not believe it? Who's really good faith and who's kind of like just disinformation. Who seems to be just there either for their own benefit or somebody's pulling the strings. So we're going to be talking about that. So everybody sit back and enjoy our trailer here, and we'll get this thing going here, and we will see you on the other side. And that is right now. Welcome to the Three Beards podcast. My name's Craig, along with Austin and Chris.
Passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century.
Let me out.
I'm afraid that is quite
justice and honor in Massachusetts colony?
All right. I gave him a second there because he had his back turned. So I was waiting for him to come back before I brought him on. All right, gentlemen, we are back. So once again, like I said in the intro, if anybody wants some beard oil, I highly recommend these guys. I highly recommend them. This bottle, the big one, it's their 1745 Barbershop. The original scent. I also got this one called Dapper Den, and then they have Bigfoot. I think the one name kind of cracked me up. Twig and Berries was one of the names, and that was what I really liked. That one. They also hide and seek. That was a pretty good one. The one I gave to Chris was Campfire Brunch. That one had a real smoky scent to it. And so there's pretty. Peach Pit was the one that he sent for free, and that one was actually pretty cool. That one's not bad.
Can I request they come out with one called the Brush and Munch?
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, I had to. I'm back.
All right.
Hey,
All
Ronnie.
right. All right. So at this time, we teased him. Like I said, he is the guy. He's gunning. He's gunning for the Harry Potter franchise. That's Travis Randall. How are you, sir?
Hey, gang. How are y'all doing?
Good,
Hey,
man.
Travis.
Oh, wonderful. Hey, Travis.
All right. So, yeah. So first off, let me bring up your. I'm going to show your website here for everybody. So that way,
Yes, sir.
yes,
Yeah,
we got.
shout out Squarespace.
That's right. We got to get the. So right there, this is the book we're going to be talking about: Hounding, a Tale of the Heaving Sky, and then this is so the world that set is the world of four corners.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I got about halfway through it.
Nice.
And
yeah.
so
Right
I
before it gets really, really odd. So you pulled that at the right time, I think.
yeah. So it was one of those. Well, I didn't tell you which half I read.
Oh, it's true.
Yeah, I'm one of those. You skip the first three chapters, read the middle, and then you leave the. No, I'm just kidding.
One of my best friends, he reads the last chapter of a book before he starts.
Oh, I can't do that.
That's
It
like
makes
eating
me
dessert.
itchy.
No, that's like eating dessert
Mhm.
before dinner, and it just doesn't work. Or eating cake from the back forward. It's just not
wrong.
right.
Well, it's like the person if
Wrong.
you have a sandwich and you have to cut a piece and they cut just like one little corner off, and that's how they cut it in half. That's just it's those type of things are just weird.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
so
no, it's. No,
can
go
I
ahead.
ask a quick question of this?
Mhm.
If I'm really big on acquiring books, I love reading, but I love autographed copies. Is there a way we can get that from you
Oh,
as well?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
We can absolutely do that.
Yeah, awesome. And anybody wants to spend a little bit more, for the tender loving care with the signature, that'd be great.
Yeah,
So,
I'm easily reachable through my website, and for as long as it lasts, Twitter. I think that's a sinking ship right now. We'll see.
oh
But
yeah.
See, and that's now that you bring that up. That's one of the things. It's kind of cool that you said that too. Now, it's the main thing, like for me, especially like with Twitter, when everybody was just like going here, it's like you can clearly tell the people that were freaking out were the ones that they were enjoying their echo chamber.
Yep.
And now that was going away, they were freaking out. And I'm like, when everybody's like, this is the end, I'm leaving. I'm like, nothing's changed. The only thing that really changed was Jack Dorsey just went out the door, and he basically showed that you could cull 80% of the workforce, and we could still tweet and we could still read tweets. I mean, that was the major change, and it's one of those things. And then Zuckerberg's rolling out his Twitter killer is what he's calling it. Yeah, and it was just one of those things. I'm like, I never saw any disruption in the tweet. Like when I do some tweets, I never saw anything different, like interactions. I didn't really ever have it. Did you notice anything?
yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me was that in my professional career, I'm what's called a cyber threat intelligence analyst. So basically, it's just a ton of research into like cybersecurity topics, and I could go down that rabbit hole if you want. But a lot of what you do is pull from Twitter, and because a lot of times when something hits the fan, Twitter's the first place it gets posted, and post Musk takeover, the algorithm no longer surfaces any of the good stuff. It's now like bots and just really odd. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll probably continue to work forever. I think it's just going to be less of a usability, less of a useful experience maybe for people who are trying to pull something really specific out of it. But for like the average dude, I don't know if anybody really notices much of a difference.
A lot of that stuff, because I used to do a little bit of what you do, and a lot of times you have to go to multiple sources.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are really going to do damage to you are they're not necessarily on Twitter. They're on Telegram now, which is really, really big, and they're using WhatsApp. And unless you know a channel to go to, it could be a freaking long time, to get what you want. But I think what he's doing, Musk, is he purchased this because he needs the interaction for his AI technology, and he literally is bought this for information. So he's pulling what he needs to pull down there. And your other problem is going to be if you're not paying for Twitter in different levels, you're never, you're going to be sent to the back of the bus.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen is people are going to be like, oh no, I'm not paying to tweet. I'm not making money off of it. I'm not paying to tweet. So they're going to be like,
Yeah.
It's kind of like that thing that's going on with Reddit right now, where they're I don't know if y'all heard about this, but they basically are saying that, hey, don't use third-party apps anymore. But the problem is that the people who use those third-party apps are the moderators. So what Reddit has essentially done is cut out their free labor force of moderation with this update, and so all of a sudden you're getting just, it's wild. Totally shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, it's
Reddit
like the
has
Wild Wild
gone
West.
downhill for a while. It's gone down for a long while, and people taking sides on these things, just like in the world, there are people that will just believe everything, and then there are people that are just like, they'll question everything. No, there can't be. And then you got that little gray island in the middle that kind of ebbs and flows back and forth to what they want to follow.
100%.
Before we get too far away from everything too, you can go to Amazon right now and purchase this thing, especially if you have Prime. You can have this delivered to you by Friday,
Door to door Friday.
Yep. So as I said, and that's $14.60 for paperback. And so people, and like I said, I'm curious how the used books are selling for more than the new books. That one's kind of fun.
It's Amazon's a mystery to me. I'm also on Cross Crow Books. Is the Burrowing Grim is an imprint of Cross Crow Books. They're my publisher. You can get it directly from the website. I'm not sure what the price is, but
Here's the $50,000 question for you as the author. What gets you the most revenue from it?
Probably the publisher website for sure, because I know I'm on Barnes and Noble and all that stuff, but I'm not really clear on the
they buy in bulk. So everybody go to the publisher's website and pick up that copy. Look, support. It's great. Amazon will get it to you tomorrow or Friday, but the guy put his heart and soul into a piece of work, and he should be compensated properly.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's Cross Crow. If you look up Cross Crow Hounding, you'll find it.
Sounds like a new Black Crowes album.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Robinson brothers are back, baby. They're reading poetry.
Yes. I'll try to find that here too. It's like, they so one of the ones too, like I really wanted to, kind of with the authors, I ask this question every now and then. My wife's a big fan of the Outlander series. Diana Gablet, she really watches that. She has what she's basically adopted in where she lives. It's kind of like her home base, and people can order from that local bookstore, can order the books, and she'll go in there and she'll sign them.
Oh, that's so cool.
So you can order the signed copy. And so I've asked the people, it's like, especially like where you're at, have you ever thought about adopting just some little local mom and pop like bookstore and just saying, you know what, you guys put this on your site, people buy the books right here, do the special package like there, I'll come in every now, like once a month or something like that. I'll sit down and like I said, I'll sign the books that you need.
Yeah, that's the good thing about Chicago is that there's just an embarrassment of like mom and pop bookshops everywhere. I did my signing at kind of a small little spot, but since this is still pretty new, I have not done any of the legwork to go and introduce myself to people and try to adopt one of these shops. But it's kind of funny you mention it, because that's been one of the things circling my brain for a little bit now.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool because I bought a couple of them from her, so as gifts for my wife, so they got the signed copies because and that was one of the things so every now and then I'll just ask the author, it's like, have you thought about this? Because it's a cool way, especially for fans, so as it grows, then
totally.
Yeah, then they have that location and Amazon has made it great for everybody because, like I said, you can purchase. Like I said, I can get the book in 2 days time. Right. But it's also the other thing. It's the Leviathan that keeps devouring everything that it gets its hands on.
That's
mean,
why,
it's
like, the Tim Kennedy, the ex Special Forces guy, the former Special Forces guy, he was on Finding Hitler. He had a book that came out, and he did exactly what you're talking about. He went to a small bookshop. It was going to be released there. That's where he wanted to release it because he wanted people to buy from them. And I got an autographed copy of his book, and it's just, why not? I mean,
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I miss bookstores. I'm really tired of going, like, oh, we'll have to go to Amazon or go to Amazon. I used to like going to a bookstore or a record store. Records are bigger than a CD, and they put a needle on them.
Yeah.
You want to explain to some of these people, because it was fun. You just, first of all, they're playing new stuff, or people are like, you would be there, and I'm like, who is this guy? Okay, let's go sit down. Oh, this is great. And then people get excited about that. They need an outlet, and it's a great outlet. Get out, get a book, buy a book.
I would say, depending on what age you are, I like to order everything and have it shipped to my door, but I mean, I think I only.
We're not talking about your gentleman magazines, Chris. No.
I mean, I still get Playboy subscriptions. Stop playing with me.
Dear Playboy, this has
for the
never happened
articles.
to me before.
All right. So Fermi paradox. We teased that one.
Yeah.
No, this one we'll kind of jump on this one because there's been a lot of disclosure. We're going to go with disclosure because we, it's kind of the camps are both split on whether or not the disinformation agents are in full force, because everybody's kind of split, like on Lou Elizondo.
Yep.
Because if you take Bob Lazar, and him, if you compare the two, and I've always used this one, Bob Lazar can't go anywhere near a federal facility at all. He's not even allowed on, Lou Elizondo is walking all over the Pentagon, Washington, D.C. He's all over the place in these meetings, and supposedly he's disclosing all this stuff. And so it's one of those things, like, kind of get your opinion. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, like, hey, call out one of these guys, but in your like you're saying, what are some of the signs to look for to like help somebody identify somebody who may be in fact getting their marching orders from somebody, like, here, I need you to go put this piece of information out there in the sphere and get buzz going on this.
And that's the hardest thing about subjects like this. You'll see this in the paranormal. You'll see this in like magical circles. You'll see this in like even like some of the weirder kind of niche fiction or video game cultures. It attracts sticky people. It attracts people who maybe don't have the best emotional wherewithal or intentions. And then you add into the mix people who are, who know that and specifically target that. And so it can be really, really hard for somebody coming in fresh and who's like, what's the deal with UFOs? What's the deal with the paranormal? And if you're a little wide-eyed, I think it can make you really easy to be, taken advantage of. So when it comes to, who's an op, who's not an op, I honestly, it's hard for me to tell. Normally I look at people who seem to be excited about what they're talking about. Yeah. There's people like, and I'm going to get probably so many people being like, shut up, stop talking about the woo-woo stuff. Cause we're right in the middle of what is possibly the most credible soft disclosure has been so far. According to, some people, I can see you shaking your head, but
I'll be quiet for right now, but
no. And so I tend to look at people like the Newkirks or the people who are in this who get more excited about it as kind of that tends to be less of a red flag for me than somebody who is been this person who has been kind of leading people along for the past, X, Y, or Z years. But again, I can't see into hearts and minds, so I don't know.
Oh, I'll just say it anyhow. I'm going to, because I have a lot of friends in business that Lou is in, and I appreciate Lou for what he's done for the country. God bless you. Thank you for your service. But if you paid attention to what Lou does for a living, he's a disinformation agent. He lies for a living. And anybody that's really disclosing the truth would not have a security clearance. That being said, They're steering you on a narrative path to where they want you to go for the disclosure. Disclosure did occur. 100% occurred. It occurred in 1977 with the global release of a movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And in it was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who didn't say a freaking word, didn't break his non-disclosure agreement, just stood there and watched as the aliens came out of the ship on top of Devil's Tower, which is a tree stump. But I'll digress.
Wow, you unpacked a whole lot there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, 'cause it's what is it like the Tic Tac? You know, I'm under myself. I'm under the belief that's I've got some feedback for some reason. You guys hear that on your end?
Yeah, I can get feedback.
Today is I feel I'm the luckiest man in the world.
All right, so it's just my side.
Yeah,
I think it just went away. See,
away.
They just tapped into us. Yeah, so but I think the Tic Tac for me is something where I'm really a believer that that's a DARPA project.
Yeah, there's the black triangle that was seen over Camp Wilson is a really good recent example of it's like April 2021, right around that time frame a little bit. It's on video. It's very, very well. It's like 10-minute long video of this black triangle with lights on it hovering over Camp Wilson. I've seen the video. It's seen by like 50 Marines. Somebody shoots a flare at it to try to illuminate it, can't illuminate it. Those are the ones that a lot of people tend to say, oh, well, that's the DARPA project, or that's the, black ops military or black budget military.
TR3B.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, that's what I think and think too, is that it seems like when you get some of this disclosure, they're not telling you an outward lie. They're just doing like, this is, they'll say something like, they're slowly putting out information out there that's just saying, that is legit, but it's just enough to where it's like I always use the term the magician's hand. It's just enough to keep you distracted, keep you looking at this side while the other hand is doing the switch.
Right. And you have, it's kind of an interesting place to be in right now, because taking a step back, like David Grush, for example. So there is no way on earth that he would be allowed to say what he's saying unless it is there's at least a party within the U.S. government that is willing to let him say what he's saying. But
yes,
it's this interesting thing where for like a total layperson who's like, ghosts aren't real, UFOs aren't real, yada yada yada, they see this and it's the most credible thing that they've ever seen, because you have this decorated combat officer who's part of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the National Reconnaissance Office, and his job was specifically to look at our airspaces and our war spaces and then take that data and give it to the Air Force. So the fact that he's testifying before Congress and the fact that this is all kind of out in the open and being picked up by quote unquote like real newspapers from the public's perception, it is an incredibly effective, whatever it is, it's an incredibly effective maneuver. One of the theories I saw is just that there are different aspects of the government that are trying to pull the reins in different directions. You have the group that wants to basically has these retrieval programs and these crafts and doesn't really know how to iterate on it. And they're like, we got to get this out. We got to make this more of a private sector thing. And then you have the other group that doesn't, and Grush being part of the former potentially is one of the things that I see as like a very common theory floated. Whether or not that has any weight to it, who the hell knows? Grush certainly isn't the only one who has come forward. He's probably just kind of the spokesperson of this group that's saying, hey, there's these retrieval programs. We've been doing it since World War II, yada, yada, yada. But the fact that, he's testifying before Congress and his defense is that he's like, hey, if I lied, I'm going to prison. And who knows, but
yeah,
less talking about it from whether or not he's telling the truth or anything like that, but just from like a civilian perspective, this is a extremely public, extremely I don't know if effective is the right word, but it has an effect.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
100% has an effect. But here's the thing, right? So when all the Tic Tac video came out and all these videos came out with the ooh and ah, I saw them years ago. They were released years ago. They were leaked years ago. I've seen them, and I was like, okay, what's so special about it? Big deal. And the first thing that I would think, given that through my research, we are about 150 years ahead technology-wise than everybody on top of this planet. With what we've retrieved from crashes to whatever agreements we made, we are doing things that are Star Trek-y right now. We've been doing it for years. And what better way to test how well your product works than test it on your own military and see what their reactions are. And if you think that the people that are in control of these projects really care about the health, safety, security, and well-being of their military people or anybody, they don't. And in my opinion, they will totally take people out just to prove that their craft work. They've done this for years.
Well, and that's also an effective way, to showcase your potential without really showing your hand too much, because like the Tic Tac video, you have it on radar, you have it on video, you have all these measures picking it up. That's a very, very way to make it Facebook official for, adversarial nation states to say, hey, either we know about this stuff or it's our stuff or whatever, but it's a way to kind of raise that up and make sure that they're seeing it.
Yeah. What better way to if you talk to any nation around the world, including China and Russia, because we've gone into China and Russia, whether we were allowed to or not, to retrieve stuff before the Russians or the Chinese. Every nation knows that they have a down craft. The UFO, the U.S. is coming in. Look what happened in Brazil.
Really Yeah, exactly. And what's really weird is the U.S. is kind of the only government out of the big world governments that is very sensitive and shy about this topic. All these South American governments, China, Russia, they seem to be much more open when it comes to like that this is a thing. Yeah,
and that's kind of like glad we did that because that was kind of lends us right into like the Fermi paradox.
So it makes you.
No, go ahead, Chris.
So it makes you wonder, since we're so secretive on it, are they originally our craft? Because if it lands in Brazil, we're getting there because it went off course or maybe something to that effect and it crashed over there. So we have to get there to retrieve it before they're like, oh, well, it says it had military markings on it somewhere. Or it was built by the U.S. or whatever the case may be. That makes you wonder, since we just go in and swoop in and we got to go get it. That makes you wonder, is it?
Yeah, and the thing with conspiracies work when you have the least amount of people as possible. The more people you involve, the harder it is to make a conspiracy function. And so if that is the case, these are still going to be, bubbles within larger organizations, that are doing this. It eventually becomes very difficult to keep that from leaking. And stuff has leaked, I'm sure some of you can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's like Bob Lazar. That's why I said he was part of that program where everything was compartmentalized. It's like you were working on this one individual piece. You had no idea what that piece went into. You were just, your job was to figure out what this piece was made of. That's it. You had no idea what it was out of. You just knew you had this cog and you had to figure out what the cog, how to recreate it.
Which I think might be why they're having so much trouble. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. You were saying.
I was just saying. I think that's probably why they're having so much trouble too. Again, I'm this guy who's kind of like a door number 3 between nuts and bolts and woo woo. I think both nuts and bolts and woo woo converge if you follow them to the end long enough, or you project them long enough into the future. But if something is advanced enough or is extra dimensional or has something that a term could apply to, it's going to be extremely hard for Joe Blow looking at one piece of it to try to make draw the whole owl, so to speak, from that piece.
Oh, and I agree. And the thing about Lazar that's very interesting is he is so intelligent. He understands the physics behind it. This is why they pulled him into the project. So when you give him a little cog and he's never seen it before, and then he starts testing elements, then his brain is already pre-wired to think X, Y, and Z not of this earth. So he's going to be curious. He wants to know. One of the biggest problems for Lazar and the biggest pains talked about it is him coming out, and he's not anywhere part of that project. So now he doesn't get the information. Whereas you have like an Lou, who's I think he's just the point for, they took the Two to the Stars Academy, and they used that as, he was he's like the Lee Harvey Oswald of the UFO community, Tom DeLonge, and they just used him to just make it really public and create a narrative and steer you in this direction, while over here they're doing all these different things with it.
Totally.
Like the Degrees of Kevin Bacon type thing. It's Bob Lazar used to work at Los Alamos National Laboratory,
Yep.
and that just happens to be the location where a certain guy named Enrico Fermi coined a term, Fermi paradox. Yeah, and it's first. I think the history, just like a little nerd thing here. It was I'm going to butcher the name. Konstantin. I think it's Slavkovsky. I think is how you say his last name. I'm not. Russian's not my forte. He is 1933. He had an unpublished manuscript where he noted the things that we're going to talk about. So nuts and just like boiling it down to like a thing. The Fermi paradox is really, it's a discrepancy, in the fact that we don't have, definitive affirmative, evidence of something of an alien race, of alien species, that based off of what we know through how many planets, how many stars, how many things right here, just there's something, and I'll bring up a picture here too, so that way people can see here, and then
Craig, I didn't think there was going to be any math in this episode.
there won't be.
There's going to be a ton of math. Get ready.
Yeah. This is
12 and
be on the
algebra.
final?
Awesome.
This is going to be on the final.
This is going to be on the final. So this is basically up. This image is really nice because up in the very top corner, it kind of breaks it down. It's like there's 400 billion stars, roughly in our galaxy, and they estimate that on average that there's that there could be as many as 660 billion or so planets, and of those 60 billion would potentially be habitable. And I think when we get down, that there should be close to, in our galaxy alone, there should be at least 1 million or more Earth-like planets in that Goldilocks zone, which is just that perfect area. And like I said, at any time, Travis, jump in here too, because like I said, this is one of the things, because I know.
Yeah. So it's one of those weird things where, so I'll come out and say it up top, and then we can get into to why. But I'm probably along the lines of, it's not aliens. It's probably something that we don't really have a great word for yet, describing a phenomena. But I think to get into that, you have to first establish a really firm foundation and talk about what is the actual science of what we know about intelligent life. And again, like you said, the Fermi paradox is trying to explain where are the aliens, where are they, with this graphic that you have is sweet. And so one of the calculations that scientists have done is that if you have like a civilization traveling at only 0.1% the speed of light, they could theoretically, if they have the right technology, colonize the Milky Way in about 100 million years. That's not very long. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. So where are these guys? And one of the very common kind of explanations is that we're the first, right? So Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And it took about that long for sapient life to appear. We don't really know though, is that average? Is that very fast? And within that time frame, we've only been doing agriculture for 10,000 years. We've been industrialized for less than 1% of our entire existence. Again, is that normal or abnormal? And the question being, could a different civilization get to space faster than us in that time? And you mentioned kind of a Goldilocks zone. There's also a Goldilocks time frame. So if you go back, the universe is very old, but the fact is that a big chunk of that 13.8 billion years was very inhospitable to life. So you had early stars blowing up. You had galaxies crashing into each other. You had supermassive black holes spitting out radiation. And what the takeaway is just that it's much more likely for a civilization like us to appear in the future than in the past. And this can be kind of augmented based on whether they're orbiting like, a red dwarf, because they'll have a much longer time frame for life to flourish. They have a lot more lifespan than our yellow sun. That is kind of the common, where are the aliens? Space is just too big. We're probably in kind of the early points of life developing in the cosmic sense, not in terms of like the past couple thousand years, but that's what you'll see most often is the explanation for like why we don't see anything. There's a couple other ones that are very common, which is, they're here, but they're hiding, whether that's like a Star Trek Prime Directive type thing. You'll see this with the zoo hypothesis a lot where, there's always... Zoo. Yeah, well, so when I was a little kid, there was this nature documentary I was watching where they were scientists like observing zebras, and they created a terrible zebra that they would hide inside, like an Ace Ventura, but just like a tent. Like it did not look like a zebra at all. The eyes were all messed up. Zebras had no idea. They were just walking by this totally screwed up zebra, and so. From a like we're very, very proud of how smart we are, but the fact is that we could be very relatively dumb compared to a different species. A lot of people tend to bristle at like I'm sure some of you have seen the Mothman Prophecies movie where they have the one of the characters talking to John Keel, and the character's basically saying that like, if you have a dude in a high rise and he sees a car crash way down the street, he's not psychic. He just has a better perspective. And there's a lot of that comparison of like, we're the cockroaches, we're the ants. And people tend to bristle at that. But the fact is that it is very, very possible for an alien intelligence to be much smarter than us. And taking that kind of their hiding perspective, that is a really, really hard thing to prove or disprove. If it is in any way, shape, or form comparative to us and zebras, then we're going to have trouble kind of picking anything up from that, right?
Yeah, that was when you said that first. I'm a huge movie fan, but it was a beer fest where the guy gets drunk and he's working in the lab and he makes a batch of monkey frogs. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like the guys come in, they look at it like, oh my god, it's idiots, I can picture that's what would happen, especially with us, because we're trying to do these things, but we're making some messed up things. They just, you can't, if people saw it, they would freak out.
Well, and what's weird too. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment on the paradox. And I've known about studying what I studied, physics, astrophysics, whatever it is. Something that history is actually, it's now coming out. Because the historical record, the fossil records are all screwed up now. They're finding things that they should not have that are 6-7 million years old, 20 million years old, that look like cell phones, that look like computers, that look like watches. And it's very plausible to feel that we are not the race. There were races prior to us that got to a certain point that are more advanced than us, and they did something stupid. And then you have the planet, they all die off, they kill each other, mud, sediment layer, and then a new, then, hey, look, Homo sapiens here now, and we start growing. So I think the Fermi paradox, you get to a certain point, then it goes down, and then you get to, it almost ebbs and flows because they're talking a lot. Yeah.
I was just say, yeah, and you talked about doing something stupid. That's kind of also a key point of they're hiding, because it's not necessarily, we talked about like the Prime Directive, don't want to interfere, or the zoo, but it's also very, very possible that from just a kind of a game theory perspective, or like if you're playing Stellaris or Civilization, it's very possible that a given civilization could be like hiding from a threat. Any other advanced civilization could be similarly competitive and dangerous as we are. So that has huge problems for first contact, because you have these huge distances, which introduce communication delays. You have alien minds, which introduce misunderstandings. And so from a survival perspective, it might be much, much smarter to strike first. You know, you remove possible existential threats. You know, if you're unsure, attack first, right? So if Earth, far future Earth, let's say, were to send like an invasion fleet against an enemy going at sublight speeds, it could take 100 years to arrive. And on arrival, you know, what's waiting for you? That enemy has had 100 years of technological development and preparation. So it'd be much smarter to surprise attack without really knowing, right? Before it becomes an issue. And even if you're talking about like people who are not really much higher than us on the Kardashev scale, it's not really insane to be able to just throw like a planetoid or an asteroid. That doesn't actually theoretically require too much sci-fi to be able to do. So the more advanced you get, it might be a situation where it's the more you realize like how dangerous it is to wave your arms in the air. So some civilizations might have a policy of, you know, no contact until first strike, you know, to maintain that advantage. And so it could be a situation where every spacefaring civilization finds this out, whether you are quiet or dead, right? And I'm not saying that that's necessarily my opinion, but again, if we're going to talk about like the really weird shit, we have to say, okay, could aliens be here? Yes, you know, based on what we understand, based on the time, you know, and the distances and all that shit. And if you, I've been rambling, so please feel free to interrupt.
Oh no, it's I was going to say as it goes. No, that's why I brought up the chart, like so people can actually see these things as we're discussing them, because that's the cool part about the paradox is it's not so much that it answers the questions. It's just basically it spells out. These are the things like, you know, Roswell, something. We have this thing here. So then we have to, you know, and that's, I've said it in many shows too. It's the W questions. We have to ask these things. Who, what, when, where, why. We've got to ask these things. We can't just go, I saw this in the sky. Okay, and, you know, what? What was the weather like? What was it? You've got to have this stuff, to answer. And that's where these things, so like the first, we can go down the list, like down the rabbit hole. It's just that we haven't found evidence because we're in a simulation. You know, this goes in the simulation theory. And that's why it says, our users haven't put enough quarters in for us to access that part of the game yet.
Which I have. There's some really really interesting.
No, you're good. You're good.
Really cool.
Ron, it wasn't me.
Science right now about simulation stuff that we could get into, and it ties in with I think a lot of. So the thesis statement, right, is if you try to pull at any point of UFOs, paranormal, whatever it is that you're into, if you're into magic, if you're into Bigfoot, if you're into UFOs, if you become interested in it enough and you're not too wide-eyed and credible, but you're, open-minded, you will eventually start pulling on every other topic. They're all kind of this interconnected jumble. And part of the reason for that is that a lot of the surface layer wallpaper stuff changes, but the fundamentals of a given experience, like the high strangeness, ghosts, UFOs, abductions, whatever, tends to be pretty identical, and not only identical in recent years, but going way, way, way back, right? And so if you are trying to explain this scientifically, you start to encounter problems, but there are some useful things that are out there that still let you try to explain, the really weird stuff, right? And part of that is the Kardashev scale, where the farther you go up the Kardashev scale, for those who don't know, it's basically a way to measure how much energy a given civilization utilizes or how much control it has over its local domain. Right? So scale goes 1 to 5. Where we are now, we're kind of just sub 1, although we might be approaching 1. And so 1 is, you're able to harness the energy of your home planet. Type 2 is you can harness the power of your home star, whether this is like a Dyson sphere or you're, feeding stellar mass to a black hole, something like that. Type 3 is you got the power over your own galaxy. And this is the point where it starts to get really, really hard to even anticipate what that could look like. Some scientists have speculated that, if white holes are real, you could be collecting matter and energy propelled out of them. But it starts to become just kind of sci-fi, we don't really know, right? And then you get into type 4 and 5. Type 4 is a civilization which has mastery over the observable universe, and then type 5 has mastery over multiple dimensions or universes. And so, again, we were talking about the anthill. We would kind of be like an anthill trying to imagine a city by comparing it to our burrow. Again, how smart are we? We don't really have a really good track record of being able to anticipate civilizations who are just like us, much less ones that are more advanced, and much less ones that are different from us.
Yeah, because you said that you used the Star Trek reference. The Type 4 would be kind of like if your next generation would be Q.
Yes, exactly.
That would be the Type 4, the one that could actually
Magic.
alter. Would seem like a god, and that's kind of like with the Anunnaki would be somewhere between. Yeah. Would be at level 3 to 4 would be somewhere around in that range.
Yeah, and that's I think
they're probably higher than that. But
oh yeah, and so like the thing that kind of got me into this in the first place, which I think is relevant to this discussion, is so I'm a researcher. I do it for work. I do it for very nitty gritty nuts and bolts things. Cybersecurity, yada yada yada. And in my free time, I got into researching weird stuff, both because I had my own weird experiences. I've talked to people who have had weird experiences. And one of the striking things is, again, you pull back enough and all of a sudden it's kind of all the same. It just has slightly different presentation, but the structure of a given experience is almost always very, very similar. It especially when you get into high strangeness, which, you're talking about J. Allen Hynek earlier. Hynek was the guy who coined that, right? He's this, for those, I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast is hyper aware, but for those who don't know, he was a skeptic, and he was a scientific advisor to the Air Force and advised on UAP phenomena until and that's what caused his conversion, because he's like, oh no, this is real as hell, right? And so high strangeness is intrinsically linked to this stuff. And earlier I kind of referenced, like, I'm sure there's so many people now, with those of you who are very excited about the stuff with Grush coming out, I'm sure are like, shut up, stop talking about, goblins and fairies and weird stuff, because, that it subtracts from it. But the problem is that these things, even the most credible sightings that we have are subatomically connected, to the really, really strange, the high strangeness, right? And so that it raises very odd questions of why is that happening? Why is it that, all these experiences throughout history seem to be pretty similar? Like there's a very fun list of old UFO encounters that were before people knew what UFOs were, and you get to see how some things remain the same, but some things seem very, very different. You hear a lot the concept of how humans kind of complete the circuit of the experience, and they kind of, whether that is your cultural background or some other thing, we are adding to that experience, right? Different facets of this larger thing, like three men and an elephant. And it starts to become very, very hard to try to explain what is happening, because all of these inconvenient, weird things start popping up. It's like trying to see the curvature of the earth. And so from a researching perspective, especially somebody doing this on their own, because going back to like cybersecurity research, you don't do research by yourself. You have different models that help you try to remove bias. You have like structured analytical techniques. You have a team that one person does collection, another person does analysis. If you're looking into UFOs, you don't have this apparatus, right? And so it's very, very easy to get lost in the sauce and struggle to understand what you're even looking at, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
That's
something was very interesting. And if you don't mind for 1 second, Craig, when we're looking at this list here, and we're talking about following the paradox, something that recently came out, which is very interesting. And there were a couple of videos of a supposed alien being interrogated and saying how they are, we are you, but in the future. Okay. That's a gray alien being interrogated, most likely not the little grays, but most likely the medium-sized grays, which are more ambassadors, but that's a different subject. But Something that came out for the last couple of years is when people started getting something. Some of these children are being born with black eyes and just look soulless and bigger heads, and some people in this field they're really going on the premise that we are creating those gray aliens right now with what they've started to do with things that people have been ingesting. I'm skirting the terms so no one gets pulled here, but some of these kids are kind of got that, we're changing humanity into this other being type of thing. So I mean, that's why we are the aliens is it's on the far right, and it kind of gels with that. But
I think it's there's so many times where like there's an interesting explanation that gets floated. Like let's take future humans, right? They're coming back in time to observe us, and the thing is that even that only would account for like a very small minority of experiencers, because my interest is not just UFOs, right? So human beings throughout history, you have it, but let's just say like just recently, right? You have people who are credible, who are average people. You have pilots, cooks, teachers, military personnel, yada, 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 who will come forward and say, hey, I saw a ghost, or I saw a UFO, or I talked to an alien, or I saw La Llorona, right? And one of the things that we have to reckon with as a kind of culture is that these are people that we'll let somebody go to jail off of witness testimony from these people, but then all of a sudden when they're trying to explain something that weirded them out and scared them and was confusing, now it's all bullshit, or now it's all nonsense.
Oh no, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, it's bullshit. You can say it's bullshit.
Right? And so, and from my perspective, you see, like you kind of have to take everything, and because again, earlier we were talking about sticky people with bad intentions, hoaxers. This field is, and probably has for its entire existence into prehistory, been filled with charlatans, been filled with magicians, been filled with hoaxers, been filled with people who are mentally ill. Like there's that famous event that happened on Reddit where a guy was posting about like all the stuff around my house is moving and yada, yada, yada. And he thought he was haunted, and Reddit saved his life because they figured out it was mold in his house. Even if 95% of all weird stuff is mold, is weather balloon nonsense, whatever, you still have a vast swath of credible humanity who goes through their life having a totally normal existence until one weird thing happens and they can't explain it, right? And so for me, it's there is a worth to looking at that, especially when you look at it and you realize that most of these experiences are very, very analogous with each other, right? So we talked about high strangeness earlier, and again, I'm sure literally everybody listening to this podcast knows what it is, but I'll define it anyway. It's essentially the combination of either like synchronicities, missing or distorted time, unexplained noises, lights, objects, extreme feelings like you're being watched, overwhelming dread, profound awe, odd events, things seeming to move on their own, weird people showing up, and then connections between things that like shouldn't be connected, right? You go to a fraudulent medium who claims you can talk to your dead dog, and using sleight of hand, the medium produces a collar, but by pure accident, it's the same collar your dog wore. And then later you go home and there's a bunch of muddy paw prints on the inside of your backyard fence. It's just this like weird, doesn't really fit into the established mold of what's happening. And for me, what's, I think, either sociologically interesting, psychologically, or scientifically interesting is the fact that high strangeness is the core component of literally every single credible weird experience that has almost ever been recorded. It's almost always present, right? And so then that raises the question, what's going on? What is all this stuff? If we're going to take the assumption that it's all kind of connected in some way, what does that mean for us? Does that mean that ghosts are aliens, or does it mean that aliens aren't aliens but are something we don't have a word for yet? And I've been running on, so I'll shut up. Yeah.
Well, no, that's
But before we get too far, it makes you wonder if the pilots that fly like commercial jets, it makes you wonder, is there anywhere in their contract or their union contract that says, hey, if you see something weird, you really can't say nothing? Because they have thousands and thousands of hours of flight time, and they're always in the sky, morning, noon, night. So they have to see things that's out of the ordinary that they haven't studied. Like, oh, I've studied that plane, but I've studied planes, but I don't know what that is.
So Chicago O'Hare. I'm from Chicago, 2006. 4:15 p.m. Central Time. There was a metallic saucer over gate C-17. It was seen by like a dozen pilots, airport supervisors, and mechanics, and they all reported it. So maybe it's different in different areas, but there are people who daily will come forward, and this is a fun like homework project for anybody out there. Ask, if you have friends, if you have family, ask them if they've ever had a weird experience. And most of the time, the answer you're going to get is no. But then if you ask them a second time, they're going to be like, well, when I was a kid, this yada, 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 or my grandmother, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, exactly. Like literally last night, I was at a 4th of July deal, and we got to talking about weird stuff with somebody I hadn't met, and they were talking about how they were renovating their house, and a screwdriver jumped off a table, right? Which again, if you look into this stuff long enough, the concepts of anti-structure, liminality, that'll start coming up really, really heavily. But again, it's just this like ever-present human experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's I think very short-sighted to try to just sweep it under the rug. And I'm somebody who is like, no, probably most things are the mold, are the mental illness, are I misunderstood what happened. I'm sure a lot of my own weird experiences are probably that, right? But some of them are for sure not, and not all of them for humanity are certainly not, right?
I don't think it's, when you said, oh, it's mold, it's mental illness, it's I don't.
That's
think
me covering my butt. Yeah.
Right. No. I know what it is. It's like there's a societal norm, and if it doesn't fit the norm, it's one of those things where like, oh, it can't be, so I'll ignore it, it'll go away. When you study these things in sciences and physics and astrophysics and engineering and whatever, it's looked into, but it's very, because it doesn't agree with what we're supposed to be doing, you have to go at a lower level with it, right? So it's not necessarily that you're mentally ill. It's just, if society was a bit more open about it and say, hey, stuff happens, weird things happen. It's constantly, the high strangeness has been going on since the beginning. You have supposedly a man and a woman in a beautiful garden, and a snake comes down and starts talking to him. Want to talk about high strangeness? There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't end there, but it's the it's the religious belief. If it's not, everything now in the paranormal, in cryptid land, in UFO land, everything's demons and Nephilim. No, though aliens are demons. Aliens and Nephilim.
That's the most popular. Like, yeah, it's weird how these explanations shift over time, right? So like let's take a step back and talk about comparative myth, right? So if you look at weird phenomena, you will see that it tends to overlap, like we've been talking about. So you have here's an example. Okay, so May 3rd, 1969, you have a Brazilian soldier, Jose Antonio da Silva. Basically, he's taking off time fishing, right? He's near Bebeduro. It's about 50 miles from his hometown, and he camps overnight. And he's awoken by voices, and he's accosted by these stocky masked figures. They shot something at his legs and made his legs like burn like they were on fire. And according to him, his attackers wore these metallic helmets with eye holes and had an apparatus which goes from the front of their containers to their backs. And he was taken up into this craft, and the craft was very, very strange. It was stone on the inside. It had benches made of stone. One of his captors pulls this lever, and there's a sense of movement for what feels like hours. So you have time dilation. And he's taking into a different stone room, and his captors remove their masks, and it's dwarves. It's big noses, ears, bushy eyebrows, long hair and beards, toothless mouths, which is disgusting. But on the tables, they have these naked bodies of people, of men and women, right? And so the dwarves are rifling through Silva's belongings. They take his like fishing tackle and his ID card, and they try to communicate with him with these weird stone tablets, and he doesn't really understand. And they start to get angry, and so he fingers his rosary out of fear, and a hooded figure appears that the dwarves can't see, and whispers something to him, and then he's like miraculously saved, right? And he's dumped violently from the craft. He wakes semi-conscious near a stream. His leg hurts. His shoulders are raw. And he's 200 miles from Beberduro, and 4 days had passed. And so, and this ended up getting picked up by Sikoani, who sent the team to go investigate. But the takeaway here is not, oh, it's actually aliens or it's demons or anything like that. The takeaway is that most of these experiences are interwoven with the cultural experience of the person experiencing them. Because if you go back further, if you go back to there's a Mrs. Sheridan in Rahi Island who was relating her experience to Lady Gregory, who was a famous kind of folklorist. And she's talking about the fairies that she sees in the woods. And she says that in the woods beyond the tree at Raheen, I used to see this door open at night and a light would shine through it. And people would come out of it, and their bodies weren't so strong or thick as ours, and their eyes are more shining than our eyes. But, you know, if I were to just hear that and not know that you were telling me about fairies, I'd be like, oh, you know, aliens, right? And so most of these things, people want to have a very, very easy explanation. And the fact is that demons, Nephilim, aliens, those things are now terms that we understand that can be easily applied to something that's probably a little bit more of again, trying to see the curvature of the earth. We probably don't have the perfect language for what is occurring yet. What we can say reliably is that this, like you said, has been going on for literally forever. There's some excellent examples from like Nuremberg about an air battle that happens where they take it as a sign of God. Carl Jung is really famous for trying to come up with a explanation for where this phenomena comes from a psychological perspective. But again, he was also very into the weird. So he kind of thought that there was something else out there too, which we can get into. But anyway, yeah.
Well, there's that quite, you know, he made one of the viewers put there that there has been actually, you know, credible accounts of where somebody is called out in the name of Jesus during an abduction experience, and it's ended. And so there's a lot of people that
car keys have ended experiences before. There was one where somebody clenches their car keys and it shakes them out of it. One of the things you'll see consistently is like I said, the structure will remain the same. The weird things will happen. And like if we're going to end the experience, you know, calling out to Jesus, clenching the car keys, you know, trying to wake up from sleep paralysis. There are all these kind of like, when you look at comparative myth, a lot of people tend to think of it as like, let's take real mythology, for example. So a lot of people will look at the Banshee and La Llorona and say, oh, those are so similar, you know, creepy, wailing, crying woman. But a comparative mythologist will look at that and not actually see the structure is what's important. And La Llorona is actually much closer to something like the Nuclevi, which is a you know, don't go near water tale, right? This is why you don't go near the water when you're drunk or when you're a child, because you will drown, right? And that's where these things tend to come from. But then you'll see these experiences popping up in high strangeness paranormal encounters, you know, so it almost seems like people are applying their it's very cosmic horror, honestly, in that way, where we are filling in what we can about something that is probably, we don't have the best mental hardware to be able to process.
And folklore seems to play a huge role in this, based on culture. I mean, all the Grimm tales are just, you know, it's just an easier way to say, oh, don't go in the wood. There's a troll under the bridge, and
Right.
and so it was like, no, don't go to the woods. There's a troll. Don't whistle in Appalachia. You go in Appalachia, you don't whistle in the woods. If something calls your name out, you do not respond. If you see something out of the corner of their eye, you didn't see it, and you get out of the woods. So, but part of this is from previous experience, so we can't discredit totally their experience, because I think if one person's had it and is scared out of their gourd, and they're not going to discuss this with people, and then another person has it, maybe those two start discussing, and then slowly it drips. But I don't think it's like a social pressure, like, werewolves are werewolves. And I think things actually do happen. I think if you take a look at all the maps around the world from the beginning, when people started charting, and the similarities to the characters, the mermaids, the merpeople, the sirens, this and that, and these cultures had no way of knowing for each other at that point, and they're talking about the same thing. So something must have been here, or existed, or came here. But why are they not here continually now?
So my answer would be that they are. That what you're describing is the grays are the fairies, right? There's something in the paranormal experience where human beings complete the circuit. Because, so like, devil's advocating, if I were a pure skeptic, and I was trying to explain this from a sociological perspective or a psychological perspective, I would say, well, the reason that everybody has the same thing is that there's something, like, everybody has a flood myth, right? Everybody in the world, every culture, just it's omnipresent. And that's because it's, there's something about our brains and the way we tell stories there's a high likelihood for that type of story to emerge based on our psychology. That's the pure materialist explanation that doesn't account for all the, the experiences that people have, and yada, yada, yada. My answer would be that so when we're talking about, like, the way that we perceive reality, there is a lot of very interesting stuff that has come out when it comes to the way that we take in information. So there's a guy named Donald Hoffman, who was a professor at UCLA, and his team was looking into evolutionary game theory and evolutionary psychology, right? And they wanted to answer the question, what is the likelihood that natural selection gives us the tools to perceive objective reality? With the alternative being, are we designed to perceive only that which facilitates staying alive to breed? And what they found out is that we are not equipped for objective reality at all. Natural selection is inherently directed towards fitness payoffs. And so organisms develop internal models of reality that essentially increase fitness payoffs, right? A metaphor would be like you're writing an email on a laptop. You're interacting with a graphical user interface. And what you're actually doing is toggling voltages in this machine. But evolution gives you that graphical user interface to, find food, stay alive long enough to have sex, to reproduce, all that stuff, right? And when we're talking about our ability to perceive reality, a lot of people tend to go to, like, oh, the mantis shrimp, it can see so much other things that we could see. But I'll even stay within the visible spectrum. There's tetrachromats, who are people who can see way more colors than we can. So human beings have generally 2 to 3 cones for color in our eyes. And there's a whole world of color that we're not experiencing even within the visible spectrum, because these tetrachromats are women who have 4 cones, and they are seeing millions of more colors, and those colors are out there. This is visible spectrum, but we just don't have the equipment to pick that up. And so taking it back to Mothman prophecies and, things like that, I think it's very, very naive to say that we have a total understanding of how the world works, or anything that would be weird fits into my box, into my bubble. There's this very old Christian mysticism kind of topic of the cloud of unknowing, where Christian mystics were trying to talk about the ineffable, or about a higher power. And they basically came to the conclusion that anything that was truly bigger than us or outside of us, we wouldn't be able to comprehend easily. And so you have to approach it with this cloud of unknowing. And I think that's a very useful mental tool to look at the paranormal. I think it's so easy to come into it and be like, it's so easy to look at something and have it, the confirmation bias, feed it into your already structured, perspective of reality. Like, I'm ready to believe in aliens. There's aliens, or I think all aliens are demons. There, it fits so easily. But the fact of the matter is that people with totally different life experiences than us, people from different cultures, people from different eras, all tend to have the same experience with the wallpaper change. But the underlying mechanism and structure of those experiences, of what it looks like with the high strangeness, is almost always very identical, very similar, And so for me, that tells us we are interacting with something that maybe it's partly in our heads. Maybe it's something like, maybe it's something that it's in our heads, but also not quite in our heads. Maybe we have to complete the circuit. But I think that's probably the best running explanation for what's occurring. And you mentioned the simulation theory. That's a very interesting stuff that we can get into also. But yeah, I always pump the brakes anytime somebody's like, this is what it is. Cause I think I think it ends up missing the forest for the trees a little bit.
Right. So,
Yeah,
the current trend right now, well, it's been a current trend. Humans want to feel part of something. And when you start being alienated because of your belief system, you gravitate towards somebody, like-mindedness. The problem we have in this world, and the problem we have in this whole paranormal community as a whole, which is the umbrella for everything, is people want to feel special because they never were, and people want to belong, and people want to be looked to as and I want to say the word leader or authority or the expert. There are no experts here. And I was talking to Greg before. I was at a group at one point, and this lady in the group called herself an angel healer, right? She's an angel, and she's thoroughly believes she's healing people. Now, the intention really nice, but she's charging people for something. And I mean, she pulled out a Tibetan singing bowl, nice size one. It cost pretty penny. And I went up to her and I said, well, that's, it's a lovely bowl. What frequency is it? What chakra, frequency, and tone? And she goes, it's from Tibet. And I said, thank you. I know that, and it's lovely, but what frequency, chakra, and tone? But it's Tibetan. So at that point, the bullshit meter flies, right? She's full of shit. She doesn't even know what she's doing, because you can't use the heart chakra to do the third eye shot. I mean, you have to use the right tool for the right job. Fast forward a week or two later, Steve Jobs, one of the guys in the place, goes, "Oh, Steve Jobs died," and everybody's like, "Oh, that's so bad." And Miss Angel Healer goes 25 minutes after, "I just channeled Steve Jobs, and he's so thankful that you're so kind, and he'll be okay." And I'm like, she ain't channeling Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs was an asshole in life, and he's an asshole in death. He doesn't give a shit if we cared or not. She's making it up. And that's the problem we have today's world. There are tons and tons of people that are making it up to stay relevant. I mean, I just did a huge rant today because I'm tired of it. Yeah, huge rant. But I'm tired of the whole thing, because you know what? There are people that, when we have people that are multiple abductees, they get taken. Yes, they're going to get taken again. They're going to have a lot more experiences. But one person having, well, they had this person in his backyard, and Bigfoot comes to him. Now he talks to Bigfoot, and now he has a ghost encounter. And no, after a while, it's like bullshit, and people have to start being called out for that. And I don't want to be the bad guy, but when I do my research, I literally have to go, I try to replicate the science factor. If you can replicate something, then there's a little bit more validity to it. Okay. and I can do things that in this world you're not supposed to be able to do or whatever. But I'm validated, and I continue to get validated. I continue to get tests. But some of these people are just batshit crazy.
Crazy.
And that's the problem we have right now. They just, talk about the mental illness. You're sane. You're totally sane.
Well, that's a big problem. That's the big problem. Is like I said, a lot of people don't use the scientific process. I mean, it's a reason why it's set up there. It's like if I strike this thing, all of a sudden fire is produced, and I have this things burn. Well, I'm supposed to be able to hand this information off, give it to Travis, and if he can recreate this thing, all right, we got something. Let's go here. I go. We're going to have these other situations where both of us are walking, and all of a sudden we just see the spontaneous combustion. This thing just bursts into flames. Well, you can't recreate that, but it's all you can't. Both of us can't claim, we're both going crazy. Where at the same time, we both can't claim each one of us is a mighty sorcerer who can conjure fire and ignite these flames. We just know that we had this experience that can't be reproduced. We know it happened. All we can do is tell the tale, but we can't claim that we're now the experts of pyromantics and that we can just conjure fire at will.
When weird stuff happens to you, especially because high strangeness often includes synchronicities, and the fact that Ted Holiday was a huge proponent of like the paranormal feeling very personal. It's I can see it happening, right? I can see how it feels. It makes you feel important. It makes you feel like you're the only one who gets it, or you've been chosen, or whatever. So even if you're not like crazy, like if you don't have a diagnosable mental illness, I could still see how this slowly but surely edges you off the track, and all of a sudden you're a what's the recent one, like the
Hare Krishna?
No, the spirit souls, like that you're the soul of the angels or something. It's like a very common recent thing that's come up. I forget what it's called, but
I
isn't
know
it something
about?
Is it like dual spirit or something like that?
that.
That's where they're claiming that there's two of you inside the same vessel. It literally, we normally call that schizophrenia, is what that used to be called. Where it's like you got split personalities and stuff like that. But now they're like, no, I have dual. There's two spirits within me. I'm like, we're normalizing cuckoo.
Are you sure that's not schizophrenia?
Yeah. I mean, that's it seems harsh, but it really is. I mean, there's a reason why crazy stuff keeps ticking up the more we get rid of mental health programs around the
Totally.
And it's like, I mean, I'm sorry, the guy that that's walking down the street swinging at imaginary devil bats, he's not Constantine, he's not Van Helsing,
and
he's literally.
Yeah, he needs help. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think what makes it hard too is that, it's kind of funny because like on one hand, I'm like, all these really credible people are saying, they've come out and said, something weird has happened to them and this will continue. This has been going on forever and will go on forever. But the fact is that a lot of times weird phenomena tends to happen more with the disenfranchised, with people who are on the threshold a little bit. This is, a lot of people who read, George P. Hansen or, things like, like Trickster in the Paranormal or Demonic Reality, things like that. Those people tend to, those authors are right to call it the fact that anti-structure and liminality are these huge components of having a paranormal experience. They're not necessary, but they seem to grease the wheels tremendously. And so you have people, who are living in trailer parks or are mentally ill or are homeless or are, who are tricksters already, and so it doesn't do it any favors, right? Even if it is real, this stuff is not mutually exclusive. You can have a diagnosable mental illness and still have a real experience. But I think a lot of it has to, like you said, be heavily interrogated. And, we can't go into these things wide-eyed and just credulous, because I think that's how we just I mean, like I'm on Reddit, and if you go onto like the UFO subreddit or the high strangeness subreddit, every now and then there's like an awesome post, right? But so much of it is just like the most, like I don't know how you would stay in that subreddit for long enough and then have a clear like.
I was abducted. I punched the alien right in the dick.
Yes.
I like that. And he's doubled over in pain. I hopped behind the wheel and I was flying all over the place until they took me out of the pilot seat. I'm like, holy God, man! There are some.
You need
like I don't know how you maintain your sense of reference after a while.
Yeah,
you have to be able to take a step back and say, hey, my experience was intensely personal, very strange. I have my thoughts about it, but then you have to be able to take a step back and say, but I could be wrong, right? And I think that I could be wrong is how you see whether somebody is real about this or whether they are, wide-eyed incredulous, and not, I could be wrong that I didn't have an experience and that it wasn't real, but I could be wrong about my understanding of what it is. And I am open-minded and I'm willing to always keep digging. Right. And I think that's how you tell somebody who is taking this seriously versus somebody who just wants to feel something in particular.
I mean,
Well, that's just it.
Yeah. Some of the bigger problems is, being a research investigator for 40 plus years, the first thing we do, especially with ghosts or UFOs, we don't know you, we have to investigate you. Part of it, do you see a doctor? We have a questionnaire you have to fill out. What medications are you taking? Are you seeing doctors? What's your doctor's name and address? We want to know. I mean, my buddy, he had somebody contact them talking about all these demons and ghosts and whatever. And, we do a phone interview and my buddy's ready to go out there and save the world. And I'm like, dude, he's taking lithium. And he was taking numerous psychotic medication. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not going out there and sitting there with somebody. It's just, this person needs help. I mean,
you go in the living room and you'll have the cardboard box. I got the craft right here.
Yeah. I mean, like, if they're not taking meds, they're drinking some crappy hazelnut beer from Publix. And it's but it's a huge problem. And the person on Reddit that's going through it, like I punched him right, they believe this.
Oh yeah,
they're all in. They're believing it. And most people that have these experiences do not want to discuss them. They do not want to relive them. And it takes. We had this woman. It took 2 years for her to feel comfortable enough to just open the door a bit. And let me tell you, holy crap, what she was going through with reptilians in upstate New York.
Well, we need to normalize that. I mean, we need to make it to where people feel safe to tell the experience. But the problem is right now is kind of what Brian was saying earlier. Everybody is so desperate to be, the next big thing on the UFO scene, Bigfoot, Dogman, whatever that they've just got the latest thing. That
I have a personal vendetta against Zach Baggins, just as an example.
Zach Baggins,
yeah, it's just, and that's just it, and it's it's kind of like the same thing. It's just where they've got these things where if you don't believe this, you're a hater, you're a troll. They come back and they fight, and it's like, no, I am. It's like I call myself the mixture between, Scully and Fox, from X-Files. I'm the mixture of the two. It's like I want to believe, but there has to be a something scientifically to anchor it to. I can't just say it's like, the people I joke about all the time. You got the family of Bigfoot living behind my house. I'm the only one that they trust. If you come over, they just vanish. They don't want to come out. You're not going to see any evidence of them. I'm like, no. Now we have to have broken tree branches, footprints, food source. They're eating something. So there's got to be a waste. There's got to be something. There's got to be something somewhere to prove.
If you are because again, I'm Captain Woo Woo, right? I'm always like, I always have the weird third explanation. So even if you want to take it that direction, there needs to be some sort of replicatable, or if you can't replicate it, some sort of consistency with what you're describing, because if we're going to take like UFOs, right? So there's a very, very famous quote that I'm sure a lot of people have kind of heard at some point, but the concept of UFOs being, let me start over. So like if we are people in a petri dish, right? If you're a bacteria in a petri dish and you have a scientist who sticks in a needle to like manipulate the medium, from the bacterium's perspective, there is just this tiny little metal sphere that appears out of nowhere and then zips out of nowhere again, right? Because they have no frame of reference for the world outside of their petri dish. And so the woo-woo can still be explained by relatively grounded theories of, okay, like going back to the Kardashev scale, if you have a civilization that is advanced enough, trying to say that it wouldn't look like nonsense is just as likely as saying that they would make sense, right? There's nothing to indicate that we would have any inkling or have any way to understand a civilization that is advanced enough to reach that level, right? And so the like we talked about, like Fermi paradox, the Chinese room is another really, really important example of how to look at some of this stuff. So when we're talking about high strangeness, are y'all familiar with the Sandown clown? Okay. So Sandown clown is one of my like pet favorite high strangeness scenarios, just because of how weird it is. It is basically, you have a Sandown, there's the Isle of Wight, UK, and you have two kids playing outside, and they hear a wailing noise, and they see this clown. It's 7 feet tall. It has a pointed hat with two wooded antennae, triangle markings for eyes, 3-digit hands, paper white cheeks, and this like perfect sphere head, right? It hops around, which again, if we're going back to structure, weird movement, hopping is ubiquitous amongst UFO stories, amongst folklore, amongst high strangeness experiences. But I digress. So this weird clown enters a 2-story metallic hut, and it's situated in a wooden area, and the kids eventually convince themselves to approach. And they see that the inside of this place has wooden furniture, and then the clown emerges holding something that looks like a microphone, and the kids are petrified because the clown is clearly not a human being, right? And so the clown starts talking to them without moving its mouth, and it asks them some things, and they ask it, are you human? And he says it wasn't. And so then they ask if it's a ghost, right? And so it replies and says, well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way. And so this like, again, two kids very easily could be making up, but this was later picked up and became kind of a famous example of like hyper high strangeness. And the reason I'm talking about it is because it's an example where you have weird movement, where you have the inside of the spaceship or the craft is not what it should look like. So many cases, like we talked about with Brazil earlier, the inside of these crafts are like wood or plywood or made out of rock. They're just like, it's just kind of Looney Tunes, these experiences. And this very, very strange encounter also encapsulates something really important, which is most high strangeness cases where somebody is talking to one of the entities, whether this is experiencing the Blessed Virgin Mary, which is a very, very common like high strangeness sighting that is cast in a religious light. But if you strip away the religious overtones, it's exactly the same. With whatever this being is, talks really weird and doesn't really seem to have a full grasp on like how to move like a person, how to talk like a person. And you'll still get some like interesting things from it. Like the aerial school phenomena, all those kids, basically said they were warned about how evolution or pollution was going to ruin the world, yada, yada, yada. Like the warning about like our bad conduct is very, very common. But I think it's important to also take a step back and look at this from the perspective of, do these experiences, are they what they seem like on the surface? So we already kind of talked about maybe our brains are completing the circuit and feeding in the the specifics. Like one person sees the Blessed Virgin Mary, another person sees an alien, other person back in Ireland saw fairies back in, the 1700s, right? But the experience itself, when these things are talking to you and are communicating, it may seem like they understand what they're talking about, but there's this philosophical problem of the Chinese room that I think could be very, very applicable. And the way that this problem works, it was designed to try to interrogate artificial intelligence and prove that it was kind of like a counter argument to the Turing test, that just because something seems like it understands and seems like it behaves in a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean that it does. And so the problem is this: you have essentially a man sitting in a room, and he is a native English speaker. He does not speak Chinese, and he has this box of Chinese characters, right? And he has an enormous instruction book of answer and response phrases, and they're all in Chinese, which he doesn't understand. And then a native Chinese speaker, slips questions in Chinese under the door. Our guy cross-references the symbols, and answers based on what the book says to do. At no point does he understand what he's saying, right? But from the native speaker's perspective, they're talking to a native Chinese speaker, if a little formal and stilted. And so Peter Watt's Blind Sight is a very, very good sci-fi book, kind of uses this problem to talk about alien intelligences. But I think it's another way for us to interrogate these experiences, that just because something is warning about pollution doesn't necessarily mean that it even really understands what it says. It's very, very possible for, like, a lot of times you'll hear how alien grays are supposed to be robotic, are supposed to be, non-organic in some way. And if you're going to take that seriously, and they are robotic, you also can apply this problem. But it also works for things that are not robotic. And so, again, going back to kind of taking a step back, and what are these experiences actually saying to us? We can't really take for certain anything that we're given during these experiences. And I'm not saying that they are not real or are not valid, or that we shouldn't, trust in or believe in them. But what I am saying is that as we are doing so, we should have it in the back of our mind that, so you'll have these experiences where, somebody will come forward and say, hey, I was warned by the aliens from Zeta Reticuli that on this day, this thing will happen. They probably had a legitimate experience, but whether they were aliens, whether they were from Zeta Reticuli, and whatever they're warning about is real, is highly, highly suspect in my mind. And so when you're looking at these experiences, I think it's, again, important to kind of challenge our assumptions, I guess, is where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that tracks. That was kind of a long...
It does. For me, it's kind of like you're trying to, it's a Drake equation.
Right.
It's kind of like that. You've got, you have an experience, but you don't have enough information to actually solve to actually solve it. You've just got small pieces. And and that's one of the things, like with all these experiences, like we'll just go back to that example. You said, me and Travis are out there walking and we see fire just suddenly shoot up. Well, we don't know where the fire came from. We don't know how, there's a lot of information that we don't know. So we can't draw an ultimate conclusion of how this occurred. More has to happen. More has to, we have to find out. I mean, was it a U.S. military where they shot something down and it, hit, and that's what caused the fire? We don't know. That's just one of those, there's so many unknowns, in the same way, like somebody has been abducted. Well, we don't know, right? Is it the alien from, or is it from the, Orion, cause we don't know. It could also be a military craft. There's a lot of stuff there's these things that we don't know how to solve this part yet. All we know is that you had an experience. Now we have to go from there and try to get these other pieces.
Yeah. And it makes it difficult because there's so much bleed over. Like, so for example, there's this Danish explorer, Knud Rasmussen, and he a long time ago interviewed an Eskimo shaman. And he was talking to the shaman, and the shaman was telling about their helping spirit, their awa, right? And the way to describe it is that the awa came and took the shaman into the air. The door and the roof rose, and they received like a power of vision that they could see right through the house and into the earth and up into the sky. And this is a extremely common initiatory experience that you'll see amongst a lot of different shamanic traditions, where you're being brought up high to talk with the gods, or you're being brought into the earth to talk with like chthonic beings or dead ancestors and things of that nature. But when he was asked to describe what his awa looked like, he said that it ran about in a pointed cap. It walked only on its heels, weird movement, and it looked like a small, charming, living doll. And if that doesn't sound like the Holder folk, if that doesn't sound like so many different, like the dwarves we were talking about earlier in Brazil, when you get this bleed over, it starts to become really, really hard to say, oh, it's just like military craft, or it's actual aliens from this specific place. I think those are not necessarily mutually exclusive. There may be multiple types of things happening, but when you kind of, again, take a step back, it starts to become really, really difficult. So again, talking about shamans, they have this like insanely strong connection to the UFO and the paranormal. Shamans can be like initiated by lineage, but they're frequently chosen out of nowhere. They have these sudden unexplainable illnesses, and they have a vision or experience of, again, being carried up into the sky or underground. But a lot of their experiences mirror UFO experiences. So in January 1976, Mona Stafford, Louis Smith, and Elaine Thomas basically encountered a UFO while they were driving to Liberty, Kentucky, and they were abducted. Mm-hmm. And Mona said that during this abduction experience, her eyes were removed, and then they were put back in. And then you have the shaman, Pyotr Ivanov, who was a Yakut, which is like a Russian ethnic group, reporting that his initiation was him getting his eyes taken out and put back in. And then you have like the implant motif, which is, so many different UFO abduction scenarios involve like a tiny, tiny object of dubious purpose getting put inside victims. And then you have the Australian Aranda tribe, who are these Aboriginal people from Central Australia, and their initiation includes implants, where a spirit, quote unquote, lances their initiate through the neck while the initiate is sleeping at the entrance of a cave. These spirit puts, quote unquote, quartz inside the shaman, but the quartz isn't really solid. It's like a quasi material, half there and half not thing. And then you look at like UFO abduction scenarios, and quartz is always, for whatever reason, the name of like the weird thing that's put in them. A lot of like new agey cults around Mount Shasta will use that a lot with quartz. And so
quartz and Bigfoot too.
Yeah, exactly. And so it again, that's where, I mean, earlier when you're trying to pull the thread, it starts like hooking on all of these other subjects, and it gets hard to see the full curvature of it.
So when you mentioned quartz, which is very interesting, in a lot of this, there's a lot of crazy properties to quartz. It can be used as a battery. It's definitely an energy source. They use them in watches to make the movement work. But something that you do in the computer field is you can actually use quartz to store digital and electronic information within the stone, and it acts as a hard drive. So, I mean, there are certain things that if it depends on your perspective where you're coming in from, not like a know-it-all perspective, but if you know enough about science, you could say, well, that's interesting because quartz has these properties, and quartz gives off energy as well as receives it. But when you get into certain things like the Betty and Barney Hill abduction,
mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And they had a lot to lose to discuss this, especially with the interracial marriage and whatever. But she was getting, fluid removed from her belly because she was pregnant at the time. We weren't doing that. There was nobody currently in the medical field that was using that technique to check embryonic fluid for genetic problems or whatever. So there's certain things that are really, really true. But why is it? I mean, like, it drives me nuts that people gravitate to this stupidest things. They don't, I don't know if it's their education level or their need to go along with the rest of the, I'm going to call them sheep, instead of doing the research, they take what is it? I freaking hate the thing, Occam's razor. I hate that term, but they usually take the path of least resistance, and to the detriment everybody doing this, that's investigating it for real.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at explanations, I think my pet peeves are generally, I honestly prefer the full skeptic than the people who are like, angels are actual angels, the fairies were actually fairies, the aliens are actual aliens, and it's all distinct, it's all real, it's all like, I think I'm much more interested in explanations that try to account for all of it, right? So whether that's like the Goblin universe or like Patrick Harpur's demonic reality, which I'll give a quick rundown just so anybody listening doesn't know what it is, right? So Goblin universe, Brian, I'm sure is the king of, but for those who don't know, Ted Holiday was a journalist in the 1930s, and he was investigating Loch Ness Monster, right? He put out books on Loch Ness Monster. He also put out books on like angling, like fishing for trout, I think. But despite the hoaxes and despite everything else, he was very, very certain that something was happening. He was seeing something, other people saw something, and so he became convinced that there is a relationship specifically between UFOs and cryptids. And so he tried to answer it. He penned the Goblin universe as a way for him to try to reconcile this like a grand unifying theory of the paranormal. Now, he didn't really want it published. His experiences were kind of almost spiritually important, and they changed his life, and he was plagued by all these questions. But we know what's in it because, God, what's his name? Colin Wilson had a typescript and published it after Ted's death. But the key points are that there's a theoretical parallel dimension or area of reality, the titular Goblin universe, where the strange things across, cultures, across eras, they're all the same. And they're all the same because there is an actor or actors who don masks, and the masks are the phenomena witnessed by humans. And so the actor exists in the Goblin universe and then sometimes pokes its head out. The second key point is that human beings complete the circuit, right? Human cognition provides like a necessary ingredient, and we help manifest the phenomena. So it's kind of in our heads, but not fully. And the number three is that the paranormal is personal. The events are mostly meant for the witness, and they only really make sense in a weird non-ego way. You'll see this a lot where people tend to change after their experiences. Their minds are broadened. And this kind of dovetails into a different, very similar theory, but slightly different, which is the demonic reality theory. And it's demonic, not as in like demon, but as in like the old Greek, fate, spirit, God, whatever. So Carl Jung, way back when, was looking into the collective unconscious, right? And so he had his theory, and he wanted to find historical precedent because they wanted to see, hey, I think I've discovered this. Has anybody else discovered something similar? And so he found a quote in an old alchemical text. And the quote was something like, the psyche is only partly confined to the body, just as God is only partly enclosed in the body of the world, right? And so near the end of his life, Jung was basically positing that we are in some way non-spatial. It's very, very similar to the information model that you'll see in certain magical traditions where, it's all in your head, but you just don't know how big your head is kind of the cheeky quote. And so Patrick Harpur was a researcher in the vein of like Jacques Vallée and John Keel. And he was trying to look at the whole picture. And so he was expanding on Jung's ideas and basically posited that the human psyche extends beyond the body, and that the human psyche may help generate reality in some way. And this is why the paranormal shifts over time. It's why it seems personally tailored to people or cultures, but the structure stays the same. So when we encounter the quote unquote demonic, it introduces surreality, it introduces like fear or awe. So that's where you get your religious experiences, your UFO abductions, your hauntings, they all upend the natural order, and the world becomes demonic for those people, right? And so he was a huge proponent of anti-structure and liminality, which we've kind of talked about, but he was also a really big proponent of not literalizing experiences. He didn't want people to, rationalize the mythic or the profound. He said it wasn't meant for your ego and strips it of what's important. So he basically there are these very, very weird theories, right? And for somebody who is a full skeptic, this is where it's like, you have totally lost me. This is all fancy, or fantasy. This is all nonsense. But what's interesting is some of the stuff that we're starting to find with science and how science kind of is understanding the world. So if you'll permit me to continue to ramble just for a little bit longer, I want to touch on like why.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes here. Yep.
Okay. So basically, reality is not locally real, right? We've known this for a little while. Real meaning that objects have definite properties independent of observation. Local meaning that, objects can only be influenced by their surroundings. But certain things are starting to become much, much stranger. So David Gross was a 2004 Nobel Prize winner in physics, and he said that space-time is doomed. And essentially what he's talking about is some of the things that are coming out from physics right now, like Nina Arkani-Hamed is a physicist who's basically trying to figure out what to do if we really can't pin down space-time perfectly. And so he started looking beyond space-time and discovered the amplituhedron, which is essentially it's a calculatable geometric object, which it's way too complicated for me to get into, but it's an object beyond space-time, right? It's an extra dimensional object that projects down to quantum mechanics and by extension space-time. So you mentioned the simulation theory. It'd be kind of like if you lived in a video game and you were finally able to theoretically calculate the reality beyond the video game. You can now measure the transistors, for instance. It's very weirdly similar to the concept of Maya and like illusion overlaying the absolute ground of being, or space-time being a VR headset. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that the tie-in with Goblin Universe and with Daemonic Reality, it starts to make a lot of sense if you are looking at this from a scientific perspective, right? And you have to take the assumption that maybe we really don't have a clear picture as to what reality is yet. And so certain things that seem very, very strange, like a Bigfoot or high strangeness or aliens, might be the symptoms of some larger phenomena that we are only being able to pick up a certain part of it. And so when you're looking at the weird stuff, I think it's very, very easy to get lost in the sauce again, but there is starting to be some really interesting science that's coming out that's like kind of pointing in that direction. And I think that's very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's several people are commenting too. If you're, hopefully you're having a good time, like I said, because we'd like to have you back for part 2.
Totally. Yeah.
Because it's one, it's like, I hate to cut you off too. It's like as time comes on, it's like me and Chris especially, we got to be up at the crack of dawn for work.
No, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, no, I said I had a great time because we barely touched on, even just the Fermi paradox that we got like halfway into it.
Yeah.
But no, that's because there's certain questions, like I said, like next week we're going to be talking about ancient civilizations, and so we're going to be definitely going to be touching on the same kind of what we've done here. But everybody, you need to go not only to his website right here, and I'm going to bring these things up real quick.
Website up
right there. That's travisrandall-author.com. And so you catch it right there, as I said.
Yep, that's perfect.
Check out his latest book. If you click it, guess what happens? Brings up another picture there.
Yeah, buy now up at the top. It'll take you
to the
publisher website.
Yeah, he's got the right there. The purchase, it's up there. It says purchase now. You can also go to Amazon.com, or you can go directly to the publisher and purchase it there. Because
it's better for Travis for you to go to the publisher or his website than to Amazon. And I know it's convenient to go to Amazon, but the man put a lot of time, effort, energy in there.
Right here.
And he should get compensated properly. So, you know what? Do him a solid and purchase from him.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. And if you like high strangeness, there's plenty.
Yeah.
And also, too, the nice part about that, especially when you go through the publisher, is that it's a direct, that metadata, goes direct to them. They, it's just obviously they know immediately how many books are being sold. Totally. You don't have to wait for some report from a secondary seller. You actually know directly. It's like, hey, we've sent out this many copies. So everybody, please go support him for that. Check it out. It's it's an epic fantasy. So it's one. It is fiction. So, but like I said, it is definitely it's a good read. I really enjoyed it. And as I said, it's typically mine. If you look at my stuff, it tends to be more on the historical so I don't read too many of the fantasy ones. So it held my attention, which is good.
I gotta ask one question because of what the subject matter is. When is the card game coming out?
Oh God, hopefully never. Yeah. No, this. You said
They
put
always
heart
make
and soul.
cards.
Yeah, this is fully a so many people talk about like fiction being autobiographical. So much of like my weird stuff was put into this, right? It's a high fantasy or a epic fantasy funneled through cosmic horror and high strangeness. So,
and it's great. I mean, like a lot of time. Look, I wish you a ton of success. I wish your publisher go, wow, he's got 100,000 sales. We better offer him something, otherwise he's walking.
Yes.
And, to get another deal. I mean, that's how it works. Like, in order to do something, you need that people to follow and to buy and purchase whatever. But I mean, part of this, I don't know about you, but when I put out my little thing, because they took my words and music, put it out, I'd love people to buy it. It's a great read for poetry, but I did it for me.
Totally. Yeah. This was a don't go insane during quarantine project that got way out of hand.
Exactly. But it's kind of cool. Like, here I have a book. I have a book on, Yeah.
Oh, before we get too far, I want to thank John Hopkins University for that graphic. I said I want to give them a shout. That was something that they developed and they had on their site, John Hopkins EDU. Cool. So I want to make sure that they got a plug since we had that on the screen for a while there, because I want to give them credit. That wasn't just something that I put together. That was definitely.
They need
don't want plagiarism on that one. That was their work, not mine, and I was very happy to use it. It was well done. So, but everybody, thank you for watching, guys. Laura, M.A. Allen, guys, thank you for the stars. Yep. And Ramona, I think we got some from Ramona too. Just you guys really appreciate that. The people that are subscribers and also just people that are giving stars, that really helps us out. And so, once again, go buy the book. Like I said, support him, and also go to Mixler.com. You can see it on the ticker right there below us. Earth Radio, sponsor for the show, where we broadcast at 11 p.m. on Wednesdays. So next week you'll be able to hear this replay to get you prepared. And Travis, I will be in touch. I'll get with you and we'll figure out a date down the road.
Awesome. Thank you.
Should
all
have
so much
something.
For your time.
Hopefully, like September, August or September might be open. So we definitely do that one. So I really, really appreciate that. So everybody, have a great night. We will have the Golden Corralios here next week. We're going to talk about
at least one of them will. Well,
at least one.
Will be here.
The other one might actually literally be at the Golden Corral having his meal. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we'll see. So everybody, thanks for watching. We've been talking about alien abduction, so we might as well have the cow abduction one see us out. So everybody, have a good night.
See y'all.